It's not a ranch anymore, Mr. Callahan. It's Lot 14's private lake frontage. That's what Vanessa Kessler told me, standing on my grandfather's land in a cream-colored suit and $400 boots, a clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. Behind her, a chain-link fence ran straight through my family's reservoir. 14 lots, $3.2 million in water access deposits already collected. 41 days until the first faucet in Eagle Ridge Highlands would cough up dust instead of water. By the end of that summer, Vanessa Kessler would pay $4,200,000, and almost none of it was for the fence. I want to tell you what she didn't know, standing there with her clipboard and her sunglasses pushed up into blonde highlights. She didn't know that the valve feeding her brand new Eagle Ridge Lake sat on 40 acres my grandfather decreed as water rights back in 1891. She didn't know I'd been sitting on a filing cabinet full of paper that made her whole subdivision legally worthless the moment I decided to use it. I didn't say any of that on that Thursday, 6:15 a.m., the morning I finally got home. I just took a picture of the fence. Then I took a picture of my watch. I grew up smelling hay and diesel on this land, 60 miles west of San Antonio, in a limestone valley my great-grandfather Silas Callahan carved a cattle operation out of in 1891, back when the state of Texas still adjudicated water the old way, first in time, first in right. Silas didn't build a mansion. He built a stock pond fed by a spring sieve, deepened it into a reservoir by 1897, and filed the paperwork that made it legal water, not just rainwater luck. That decree passed to my grandfather, then my father, then to me, the same way the oak table in our kitchen passed down, built in 1899 by Silas himself, the top still bearing a burn scar from where my father set down a branding iron in 1958 and never told my grandmother how. 3 generations of Callahans are buried on a rise above that reservoir, under cedar trees that drop needles into the water every October. I know the sound the wind makes moving through those cedars. I know the smell of algae and cold limestone spring water in July. And I know the particular quiet of a place that's been in one family for 130 years. I'm 64. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the Army Corps, water rights and irrigation systems, the last stretch of it advising on canal reconstruction outside Kandahar. I was gone 14 months. My daughter kept the ranch running. And while I was gone, a development company called Eagle Ridge Land Partners bought the 400 acres bordering my property, built 40 homes, and put Vanessa Kessler, 52 years old, HOA president, majority owner of the development LLC, in charge of selling the dream. Her dream had a fence in it. My family's reservoir, sitting mostly on Eagle Ridge land but fed entirely by a spring on mine, with an outflow valve that had belonged to us since 1891. She'd renamed it Eagle Ridge Lake. She'd sold private lakefront access to 14 buyers at premium prices. She just hadn't asked who actually owned the water. The fence went up on a Tuesday in March while I was still overseas. My daughter called me crying, said men in HOA vests were stringing chain link straight across the old cattle gate, right up to my property pin, and posting a sign, Eagle Ridge Community Lake, residents only. When I got home that Thursday morning, the sign was still there, glinting in the early sun, and so was a certified letter waiting in my mailbox. The letter cited Texas Property Code Section 202.004 and claimed my grandfather's old pump house, poured concrete, built in 1931, holding the original valve mechanism, was an unauthorized structure encroaching on HOA common area. Fine, $200 a day, retroactive to the date the fence went up. 41 days already. $8,200, growing. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't yell. I got my camera and I got a legal pad and I wrote down the time, 6:47 a.m., and photographed the fence, the sign, the letter, the pump house door with the padlock someone had cut and replaced with an HOA lock of their own. Vanessa found me there an hour later, clipboard in hand, Range Rover idling on the new asphalt behind her. Mr. Callahan, she said, smiling the way people smile when they think they're being generous. I know deployment paperwork is confusing, but your structure violates our covenants. We can discuss a settlement. I said, what time do you have? She blinked. Excuse me? Just wondering what time you have, for my notes. She didn't understand yet why that mattered. I wrote down 7:52 a.m., her exact words, and the license plate on her Range Rover. Then I drove into town and mailed 3 certified letters of my own, one to the HOA management company, one to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and one to myself, postmarked, unopened, the way my grandfather taught me to preserve a claim before anyone tried to rewrite the story. I spent the next 2 weeks at the county courthouse instead of arguing at gates. Here's what most homeowners don't know. A fence doesn't grant water rights, and neither does a name change on a subdivision map. Under Texas Water Code Chapter 11, surface water rights are adjudicated and recorded, and priority dates matter more than property lines. I pulled the original 1891 filing, then the 1967 Water Rights Adjudication Act paperwork confirming it, then Certificate of Adjudication Number 14-2019, still active, still in the Callahan name, senior to anything Eagle Ridge Land Partners had ever filed, because they'd never filed anything at all. They'd just built a fence around a reservoir and called it theirs. Then I found the second file, the one that made my stomach turn cold in that air-conditioned records room. Eagle Ridge Land Partners had recorded 14 separate purchase agreements, each one promising permanent deeded lake access to the reservoir, each buyer paying an additional water access premium averaging $228,000. 14 lots, $3.2 million collected on water Vanessa Kessler never owned a single legal drop of. That same week, I met Edith Pruitt, 78 years old, widow of a Korean War veteran, oxygen tube looped under her nose, living in the one modest lot the developer hadn't managed to buy out before building around her. The HOA had fined her $400 for her propane tank being visible from the lake trail. She was crying at her kitchen table when I brought over a casserole, telling me Vanessa had said if she didn't sell, the HOA would make sure her lot value went to nothing once the lake dried up in a bad year, and that maybe I should think about that too for my own good. I looked at Edith's oxygen concentrator humming in the corner, at her late husband's folded flag on the wall, and I thought about my grandfather's decree sitting in a fireproof box back at my house. I didn't tell her yet what I was planning, but I already knew whose name was going on that valve key when the time came. Edith's hands shook when she poured the coffee, the cup rattling against the saucer. She came by in that white truck, Edith said, with 2 men from the management company. Told me the lake was going to raise everyone's property values except mine if I didn't cooperate. I don't even know what cooperating means, Mr. Callahan. It means selling, I said, at whatever price makes her look generous. Edith's late husband's flag case caught the afternoon light through the window, folded tight and square, the way they do it at Fort Sam Houston. She noticed me looking at it. 41 years married, she said. He'd have had something to say about a fence going up on Callahan land. He always liked your grandfather. Said Silas was the only man in 3 counties who never once cheated a neighbor on a water line. That stuck with me the whole drive home, dust kicking up behind my truck on the Caliche Road, cedar posts leaning the way they always had, older than the HOA, older than the fence, older than Vanessa Kessler's Range Rover. I called 2 other neighbors that evening. Hal Dorner, 71, retired schoolteacher on Lot 9, and Rosa Delgado, 66, whose husband had passed the year before. Both had received the same letter I had, different structures, same $200 a day language. Both had gone quiet and paid because nobody wants to fight a homeowners association with a $3.2 million marketing budget behind it. They told us the lake access was already deeded, Hal said. Showed us pretty brochures, said it was practically state-approved. There's no such thing as state-approved water rights from a subdivision brochure, I told him. There's only the decree, and I have the decree. He didn't understand yet what that meant, Neither did Rosa. I didn't explain it fully, not that night. I just asked them both to keep their certified mail, keep their photographs, keep track of every date and every dollar the HOA had squeezed out of them. Back at my kitchen table, under the burn scar in the oak Silas built in 1899, I laid out 3 documents side by side: the 1891 filing, the 1967 adjudication, and certificate number 14-2019, still valid, still senior to anything Eagle Ridge Land Partners had ever recorded. Then I laid the 14 purchase agreements beside them, each one promising water that legally belonged to a Callahan. I sat there a long time in the quiet, listening to the cedar wind outside the window, thinking about Edith's oxygen machine and Silas's decree, and a woman in a cream suit who didn't yet know what she'd built her entire subdivision on top of. The escalation came on a Saturday morning, the kind of clear September day that makes water shortages feel impossible until you're standing in front of one. I was at the courthouse annex filing my notice of intent to enforce priority water rights under Texas Water Code Section 11.081 when my phone buzzed. Rosa Delgado, voice shaking. "They're at Edith's. They brought a truck." I got there in 11 minutes. Vanessa Kessler stood in Edith Pruitt's front yard in a blazer the color of wet concrete, directing 2 men from the management company as they hooked a chain to Edith's propane tank enclosure, the one she'd already been fined for. Edith stood on her porch, oxygen tube trailing, gripping her walker, telling them to stop, that the tank was rented, that they had no right. HOA bylaws give us authority to remove non-conforming structures after 30 days' notice, Vanessa said, loud enough for the whole cul-de-sac. Mrs. Pruitt was notified. She wasn't, I said, stepping out of my truck, phone already recording. I have her copy of every letter she's received. There's no 30-day notice for this. You're pulling her medical equipment's power supply off her property without a court order. Vanessa's smile flattened. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. Callahan." "It does now." I held up my phone. "Time's 9:14 a.m. You're on camera trespassing on a fixture tied to a life-sustaining medical device. That's not an HOA violation. That's Texas Penal Code Section 28.03, criminal mischief, plus interference with medical equipment. I'd stop pulling that chain if I were you." She stopped, not because she believed me, because she saw Hal Dorner's truck pulling up behind mine, phone raised too, and Rosa's teenage grandson filming from the sidewalk. 3 angles, time-stamped. She told her men to leave the tank, spun on her heel, and drove off in the Range Rover, gravel spitting behind her tires. That video went into the same folder as everything else: the fence photos, the certified mail, the 14 purchase agreements, the adjudication certificate. I wasn't building a lawsuit anymore. I was building a case file the district attorney would eventually thank me for. I spent the next 10 days doing paperwork instead of confrontation, because that's the part nobody films for the highlight reel. I filed formal notice with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality regarding unauthorized diversion from an adjudicated water right. I filed notice with the county that I intended, as senior rights holder, to restrict outflow to protect decreed use, livestock and domestic, under Water Code Section 11.121, which lets a senior holder curtail junior or unauthorized use during any dispute over priority. I sent the HOA management company a certified letter, return receipt required, informing them the reservoir's outflow valve, structurally and legally on Callahan property since 1931, would be closed for scheduled maintenance and inspection, effective the following Monday at noon. I invited witnesses to that inspection, not reporters, not yet. A licensed water rights attorney I'd hired out of San Antonio, a field inspector from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, whom I'd called personally after filing the complaint, and Sheriff's Deputy Ray Bonham, because closing a valve on your own land isn't a crime, but I wanted an officer present anyway in case anyone decided to make it one. Monday neon, the sun hard and white over the reservoir. Vanessa arrived without being invited, tipped off by someone at the county office. She came in the Range Rover, clipboard in hand, 4 HOA board members trailing behind her like she was leading a funeral procession for her own subdivision. "You cannot shut off community water," she said, stepping onto Callahan land, past the fence her own crew had installed. "That lake serves 40 homes." I set my grandfather's decree on the tailgate of my truck, the paper yellowed, the seal from the state still crisp under plastic sleeve protection. Beside it, I set the brass key to the outflow valve, the same valve Silas Callahan installed in 1931, the same one his son maintained, the same one I'd oiled every summer of my childhood. "This is Certificate of Adjudication, 14-2019, I said, loud enough for the inspector, the attorney, and Deputy Bonham to hear clearly. "Senior priority date, 1891. This water has never belonged to Eagle Ridge Land Partners. It belongs to my family. You built a subdivision on a promise you had no legal right to make, and you collected $3.2 million doing it." Vanessa's face went the color of the concrete blazer she wasn't wearing that day. "That's BOR. That decree doesn't apply to residential BOR. It applies to every gallon that leaves this reservoir," the CEQ inspector said, flipping through the paperwork I'd filed. "Ma'am, this certificate is valid and senior. Your development has no adjudicated right on file at all." I turned the key. The valve groaned, metal on metal, a sound I'd heard 100 times as a boy, standing beside my father. Water that had been flowing steadily toward Eagle Ridge Lake for 6 months slowed to a trickle, then stopped. Vanessa lunged toward the valve housing, like she could physically stop it with her hands, shouting that I was destroying property values, destroying her development, destroying her buyer's investments, and Deputy Bonham stepped between her and the equipment. "Ma'am, that's an active piece of regulated infrastructure. Step back." She didn't. She grabbed the valve wheel and tried to force it open, and that was the moment, recorded by the attorney's phone, by the inspector's body camera, by Hal Dorner, standing at the fence line with his own phone raised, that she crossed from angry HOA president into criminal trespass and interference with a regulated water control structure, a third-degree offense under Texas Water Code Section 11.081, combined with Penal Code criminal mischief statutes. Deputy Bonham cuffed her right there on the caliche, in front of the 14 lock buyers who'd started arriving, drawn by the commotion, drawn by dry hoses and brown grass that had already been creeping across their new lawns for 2 weeks. The verdict came 4 months later, after the Bexar County District Attorney's Office finished tracing the money. Vanessa Kessler pled guilty to felony theft by deception and violation of the Texas Water Code for unauthorized water diversion. She was sentenced to 7 years, 5 suspended, and ordered to pay $3.2 million in restitution to the 14 lot buyers who'd purchased lake access that never legally existed, plus an additional $1 million in civil penalties and legal fees, bringing her total financial reckoning to $4,200,000, exactly as promised at the start of this story. Eagle Ridge Land Partners dissolved within the year, the development sold at auction. 2 board members who'd signed off on the fake purchase agreements took plea deals and paid restitution of their own. The fence came down that October, cut apart by the same company that installed it, at HOA expense. Edith Pruitt was elected the new HOA president in an emergency vote. Unanimous, 14 homeowners, 1 widow with an oxygen tube who finally got her propane tank left alone. I forgave every water access family their old fees and drew up a fair use agreement instead, decree protected, permanent, at no charge. These days the reservoir runs full again, cedar needles drifting across it every October the way they always have. I sit at my grandfather's oak table sometimes in the evening, coffee going cold, thinking about how patience outlasts paperwork every time, how the law protects what you actually hold, not what you claim. Silas Callahan never cheated a neighbor on a water line, and he never once had to raise his voice to keep what was his. 3 months after Vanessa's sentencing, I got a call from a rancher 2 counties over. Said a new development was trying to claim his grandfather's spring rights too. Said he'd heard I might know something about that. I told him the same thing I tell any of them. Pull your county records first, before you call a lawyer, before you post a single thing online. Find out who filed what and when. Water rights don't care about brochures, they care about dates. He asked me how I'd known, all those months I was overseas, that the fence wouldn't be the end of it. I thought about that for a second, looking out at the reservoir from my porch, the light going gold the way it does in late afternoon. I didn't know, I said. I just knew what my grandfather left me, and I knew paper doesn't lie the way people do. That stuck with me after I hung up, because the truth is, standing at that valve wheel back in September, I hadn't felt triumphant. I'd felt tired. Tired the way you get after carrying something heavy for a long time and finally setting it down. Edith had been there that day too, in her wheelchair now, oxygen tank strapped to the side, insisting Rosa push her out to the fence line so she could watch. When the water stopped, she didn't cheer. She just nodded slowly, like a woman confirming something she'd suspected her whole life, that somewhere, somehow, things still worked the way they were supposed to. Hal Dorner came by 2 weeks after the sentencing, sat on my porch steps with a glass of tea, and asked the question I think everyone in Eagle Ridge had been chewing on. You could have closed that valve the day you got home, Frank. Could have saved yourself the whole ordeal.
Why'd you wait? I turned my grandfather's brass key over in my hand, the metal worn smooth from 3 generations of palms. Because a man who moves that fast looks like he's settling a grudge, I said. I needed the county to see her steal something on camera before I ever touched that wheel. Otherwise, it's just a rancher being spiteful. This way, it's the law doing exactly what the law's supposed to do. Rosa Delgado's grandson, the one who'd filmed Vanessa grabbing that valve wheel, ended up submitting his footage to the DA's office as evidence. Deputy Bonham told me later that clip did more to secure the plea deal than half the paperwork I'd filed. Funny thing, I thought, a teenager with a phone finishing what 130 years of decrees started. Edith invited the whole street over for her first HOA meeting as president, out on her lawn instead of some rented conference room, folding chairs in the grass, a folding table with lemonade, and a paper sign taped to the front that just said, "Welcome." No logo, no fence, no clipboard. She thanked me in front of everyone, voice shaking a little, oxygen tube hissing softly between words. And I told her the only thing that needed saying. "Your husband would have liked this," I said. "A yard full of neighbors instead of a fence full of strangers." She cried a little at that. So did Rosa. I didn't, but I'll admit my throat went tight standing there under the cedar trees, listening to water running clean and full again down toward homes that had nearly lost it for good.